And we are live. Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to IsoBreak number 14. Um, I was thinking earlier that, IsoBreak grew out of the pandemic shutdown and um, everything around the world shut down, including Bob Dylan's never ending tour. But IsoBreak has continued to put out and become kind of an international sensation. I think that's due to the high quality of the work that IsoBreak presents. And I'm really expecting the same for tonight. Um, I'm Tim Tomlinson from New York Writers Workshop, and I'm really honored to be filling in as host tonight for my colleague and the founder of IsoBreak, Ravi Shankar. Ravi is here with us up there in that left corner under that lid, and he'll be reading a bit later. Um, he'll be reading from his memoir, Correctional. ISO Break is jointly sponsored by New York Writers Workshop and our favorite organization, South of the Equator and East of the Sun, Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. Tonight we have some AP royalty with us, our dear friend Sally Breen, the current director of APWT. Sally will be leading a reading later in the program as well. We also have Helen Burns, with whom we've rumbled on two continents and now finally in the virtual world. And I'm delighted to meet our other two readers for this evening's program, Dominique Kane and Calcalia Yang, checking in from Mumbai and St. Paul, Minnesota, respectively. We'll be hearing from them shortly as well. I want to let everyone know that we have a live chat function. Please say hello. Let us know where you're checking in from. We always like to get a sense of how global the reach of IsoBreak is. And tonight we have people checking in from Australia, India, Brooklyn, Las Vegas, and St. Paul. We have time at the end of the readings to have a chat with the writers. So please do put some observations or questions in the live chat, and we'll get them into the conversation. Between each of the readers, I'll be reminding everyone of who we are and what we do and what we're doing. And I think that's it for the admin, and we can just get right into things. So tonight we're going to start with Helen Burns. Helen is an Australian writer and poet. She's a recipient of a Varuna Longlines residency and a Byron Bay Writers Festival residential mentorship for The Way is a River of Stars, a travel memoir published 2013. Her debut novel, Andal's Garland, was awarded a Hachette QWC Manuscript Development Residency, a companion volume, Garland of Love, created in collaboration with the photographer Allison Taylor, contains Helen's interpretive translations of verses composed by 9th century Tamil poet and goddess Andal. About Andal's Garland, Sharanya Manavanana has written, gently philosophical and elegantly erotic, Andal's Garland has a narrative charge that spans centuries and continents with ease. Let's span some continents. Helen, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. And hi everyone. And thank you to APWT and New York Writers Workshop for hosting this event. It's such a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to read from the novel and a little bit from the beginning and then towards the middle of the book. And so you have a sense of. On the first day in the month of early dew, Andal woke long before the sun. It was the hour of Brahma, when the gods were nearest, so close his breath might brush her cheek. Birds were still asleep in their nests, heads tucked into wings. Moon-flecked shadows of tree branches and tall houses laced the earthen streets outside her window. Andal lay in this quietest hour of all, sensing the imminence of something or someone quilting the air of her room, breathing into her, pounding her temples, beating at her ribs. Stars still crowded the dark square of sky above the courtyard as she drew a pail of cold water from the well. She braced herself before splashing her face, then combed coconut oil through her raven curls, tied a length of homespun cloth round her waist. She was 12, of a marriageable age, so she veiled her head before unlatching the gate of her father's house. Undal felt reprieved for a little longer before the buds of the moon lilies closed in her father's garden, before the pleas of her mother, the neighbours' gossip, and, from the only one who mattered, his stubborn silence. Except for the occasional bell of a water buffalo and the skip of her feet through the night jasmine air, nothing else was perceptible. She felt an uncomplicated joy, free from the familiar despair that pooled in her throat like salt dropped into a tumble of water, like the circle of ripples only ever rumouring his reflection at the bottom of her well. She followed Lilliputter's wide main street, past the entrances of its 2-story houses flanked by carvings of dragons rearing twice her height. Those giant elephant trunks hanging from their sculpted mouths, how she had shrieked with delight hearing her father describe these guardians with their crocodile head and lion legs, their monkey eyes and peacock's tail. She passed the scents of sacred basil and rose, infusing the air of her upper's temple garden, and, on the other side of the wall, the gateway of 1,000 gods leading to Lord Tirumal's temple. Then, through a labyrinth of alleyways and thatched dwellings, she skipped to the edge of town. She looked to the eastern horizon, beyond which, people said, were the waves of a great sea. Hints of lilac turning to crimson washed the sky, dismantling all of its stars. But there was one bright light rising as if it, and not the sun, claimed that particular morning, Venus. Undal turned to face the dark red-rimmed peaks of the Western Ghats. Hovering in the crevice of 2 mountains was another bright star, Jupiter. Women were already gathered at the low stone temple on the banks of a river. Its source was a spring bubbling up through the floor of a cave deep within the Lang forests of the mountains. From Lilliputta it snaked a slow path across the plains to the sea. For the next 30 dawns in this early June month of Margali, they would bathe in its chilly waters, offering rituals to Katyayani, the goddess their ancestors had invoked since the beginning of time. But now their drumbeats and incantations summoned the presence of a god as well, a blue-skinned god who flew between worlds on the back of an eagle and made his bed on the coils of a snake. It was he who swung the pendulum of stars that morning. He watched Undal, unable to contain her excitement, standing midpoint in this rare conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. Chapter 1. For the Love of God. I counted 15 rupees into the bookwaller's hand. A playful title was my first thought. Of all the paperbacks I had picked up and put down on that marathon Sunday morning, this was the one I chose. Marcus and I had walked from Jama Masjid to Chandi Chowk. It was the last day of June, pre-monsoon and dripping hot. Any moment my legs would crumble and I'd aspire into a puddle right there on the pavement. But I didn't fall, because that was the moment I saw her. The book's cover was faded, its thin spine torn, and there she was, dancing on the front. A copper engraving of a girl, hands raised above her head, feet poised. I skimmed the back cover. The title had nothing to do with the cry of a woman at wit's end. It was a book of Tamil poetry. Flipping through its pages, I stopped at the verses of a girl called Undal. She was the only female in the company of 12 poet saints who lived more than 1,000 years ago. Clouds, dark as clay moulds, I am the wax inside you. Rain down on Venkata, where Tirumal lives. Caress my body and soul. Melt my heart. Pour him into me. I had no idea where Venkata was or who Tirumal might be, and had never heard the name Undal. But there was a charge to the words, as if the entirety of love had been condensed into 4 lines. And then moving probably halfway through the book, she continues, had I been born a woman in the Sangam age of Tamil country, 10 centuries before the birth of Undal, and had my husband preferred the arms of some harlot, an acceptable practice apparently, I would have dried up and rotted within like an abandoned tortoise egg. Imagine my flush of recognition coming across this phrase in Pennington's library one hot Srivilliputter afternoon. There were dog-eared volumes of poetry and ancient treatises on Tamil culture groaning on the shelves of what had become my favourite room when the temple gates were closed. Once past the security check, the shoe counter, the bag counter, then the interrogation of a conscientious junior as to my reasons for needing their establishment, I said poetry, and she was satisfied. I followed her up a spiral staircase to a desk with a view to the mountains under one of those single-speed ceiling fans powerful enough to tear a loose page from its hand-stitched spine. Tea or coffee, madam? Sugar? Married women were chaste creatures in traditional Tamil society. Men, on the other hand, flitted from blossom to blossom like honeybees, their golden bodies pleasured, nectar dripping from their mouths. The list of fine qualities I read in one tissue paper page volume called Glimpses of Tamil Culture was impressive for a man. He should be strong like an elephant, bold as a tiger, intelligent as a swan, regular as a rooster. The aspirations for a woman seem positively coquettish in comparison. She should be like a parrot in speech, a peacock in her beauty, swan in gait, and have eyes demure as a deer. Good cook and childbearer were implied perhaps, as these tasks by nature were invisible to men. Was it just the hot air whirling like a tornado above my head making me cynical, or the concurrence of my dried up eggs and brittle insides? I looked to the mountains and wondered about the fates of women, and really, has much changed in 24 centuries? Was my acquiescence to Marcus's statement of celibacy an aberration unique to me? Would any other woman have simply checked out, the holy ground of her body too precious to waste? Or was my response a virtuous one? In staying, I chose a path untainted by a desire as base as sex. I stirred in the layer of sugar granules at the bottom of my teacup. There were chinks of higher ground in my rationale. I had made a choice, passive as it was, but was I kidding myself? My body stayed independent of the arguments I conjured, and no matter how noble my thoughts, it just kept on fanning the flames. And what about love? I don't think love had a chance in the heat whipped up through those first years of our celibacy. I fell into the arms of a secret stranger or two, my body allowed to wake and glow temporarily, my mind numbed by the comfort of it, and my heart never sure of its place. Everything changes, that's one certainty. And my body did, eventually. It began to need less and less until even if I desired sex, I was unsure if it would be physically possible. My vagina felt like it had petrified into a channel of stone, and no amount of flower offerings or incense smoke was going to wake it up. A woman's lot was a life of quiet duty and adornments in these ancient texts, while the list of equalities for a man continued. He should be industrious as an ant, hard-working as a bull, selfless as a cow, patient as a donkey, chaste as a monkey. The sip of tea I had just taken spluttered across the desk, wrinkling that last phrase. My guffaw earned the eyes of one of the newspaper readers. Should I ask him for an interpretation? But he'd swiveled his chair away from me. I wiped the page and read, last but not least, a man should be faithful as a dog. I, Saisha, of Western disposition and with inestimable patience for the fickleness of men and the playfulness of the gods, was buoyed by this contradiction. Or was it a joke? Or did men simply get everything they desired, then saunter home, king of their castle? That's it. Thank you.
Well done, Helen. The virtual applause is so loud I have to take off my headphones. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more about Andal's Garland and A Garland of Love in the upcoming discussion. Just a reminder to everyone out there, you're watching IsoBreak number 14, conceived by Ravi Shankar and co-hosted by New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. I'm Tim Tomlinson, filling in tonight for Ravi, who's one of our readers. AP Writers is in its 16th year. Each year up to the pandemic, APWT held international conferences in locations across Asia and Australia. COVID has put a temporary hold on those, but if I hear correctly, the conferences will be back on the docket starting next year in India. We'll get the URL up in the chat so that people can check and continue to check on the website for updates about that conference. You might also have a look at the APWT Drunken Boat Anthology of New Writing, which is this formidable volume, edited by Sally Breen, Ravi Shankar, and myself, and about which Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Vijay Seshadri has written, "The book is fresh and thrilling, suffused with the sense of a beginning, but also with the sense of the perennial and the permanent." And I think the same might be said about our next reader, Dominique Kane, whom I'm honored to introduce. Dominique is a 25-year-old novelist with a master's from the University of Sussex. Though she writes some poetry, her first love is prose fiction, the novel in particular. She's been published in literary journals, online and in print, such as the Lakeview Journal and the Purple Breakfast Review. Aleppo, her short story, was longlisted for the DNA out-of-print short fiction contest. She was also a winner of the Campus Diaries 25 Under 25 contest, a national talent hunt that highlighted the skills of 25 people in 4 categories. Sunlight Plain, her first novel, was published in 2018 and is available at Crosswords bookstores across the country of India, I'm going to guess. And perhaps there's a link to it that you might throw into the chat at a certain point, Dominique, so others might have a look at it.
Yeah, sure. It's on Amazon too.
Oh, yeah. So throw the link in there, and maybe we'll have some sales before we close out the evening.
Sure.
About her debut on IsoBreak, Dominique writes that my perspective on fiction as memoir is to think of stories the way we think of jewelry boxes. We cannot pour all our riches into little jewelry boxes, but we always end up storing the things that we value most. I think Mariska and Major is a story that is a jewelry box. And welcome, Dominique, to read Mariska and Major.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Sally and Ravi, for organizing this. So I'm just going to read the beginning of my very long short story called Mariska and Major. Mariska is not an Indian name. I think that's what caught my attention. She looked Indian enough, but there was something otherly about her, as though she spent too much time reliving childhood fantasies in her head. Still, she was nice and we were neighbors, so we became friends. She was the newest addition to our town. You wouldn't know where I grew up. It doesn't exist anymore. The people who live there have moved on, their children based in expensive countries with jobs like doctor and lawyer and techspert. Our town was on a mountain. It snowed in the winters and burned in the summers. The little houses there were like grit in a nail bed, clinging to nooks and crevices in the rock, held together by a thread of a road. Sometimes a bus would come to take us downhill, but we rarely ever boarded it. I believe my town might have been the last idol in India, my country now full of choking cities. Today there's a shopping mall over my home. The mountain was blown to pieces, and in the winter it is ash, not snow, that falls from the sky. But this is not about any of that. Those are big things: development, environment, the passage of time. God knows I'm too small for such big things. This story can fit inside a coin purse. You could spend it at the corner store. You might drop it on the street and not even notice. Mariska was tall for our age. Her hair was long and bounced when she walked. She said she'd come from a city. I don't remember which one. She told me her mother had disappeared the way a dream does as soon as you wake up. Such things happen to Mariska, the things that happen to people in novels. Anyway, long story short, she didn't want to live with her unemotional, distant, boring businessman father and decided to come to our town to stay with her grandmother. Her grandmother was another storybook creature. I had known her since I was little. She would smile and give me a boiled sweet from her bag whenever she saw me, so I grew up liking her a lot. She asked all the children to call her Major. She used to be a doctor in the military, and Major was her designation. I'd never been to her house before Mariska invited me. We can watch an old movie, she suggested. She was always watching old movies. She said they were better than new ones. I would tell her that she was an elitist. For some reason, it made her laugh. Drishti, she said my name. It means vision, doesn't it? Yes. That makes sense. You see things the way they are. The truth at the heart of everything. Seriously, Mariska would say things like that. Major's house smelled of ginger tea. I soon learned this was because she was always making some, fresh, with great knuckles of ginger peeled and thrown into the pot without chopping. I'd never had such strong ginger tea, but after a few sips, I discovered a taste for it. Major was quick to pour me more, and the three of us sat around the table, chatting. Mariska loved her grandmother more than anyone else in the world. They laughed all the time. They had inside jokes within inside jokes. Spontaneously, Mariska would hug Major, and Major would stroke her long open hair and tell her she had a beautiful soul. I didn't know grandmothers could be like this. I didn't grow up with grandparents. Later, when we were watching a movie in Mariska's room on a grainy TV with poor reception, I decided to go to the bathroom. And a stranger passed me in the corridor. She was impossibly tall, with an oddly shaped face and black, empty eyes with no pupils. Her body was covered in mottled cloth, the color of old bones. I can't tell you if it was a coat or a robe or a cloak. It was a cloth, like several bed sheets torn and stitched back together wrong. She ignored me as she passed, but I couldn't move, my breath trapped in my lungs like a caged bird. I was sure if I even twitched, she would pounce. I remember the first time I saw a snake, my father had said, when facing a predator, don't run. The stranger crossed the hallway and vanished into the shadows. Only then did I dare stir, throwing myself into Mariska's room, my hands clammy and cold. There's a monster outside. She looked up at me from where she lay on her stomach on the floor. Oh, what did it look like? I described it, breathless, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. Mariska only blinked. I guess I shouldn't be surprised you can see them. Your name means vision. You can see the truth. She took me to her grandmother's room. Major was at her desk reading and barely looked up as Mariska opened her cupboard. With great purpose, Mariska heaved something log-like out of its depths, plonked it on the floor, and unrolled it. It was the most fascinating carpet I'd ever seen. Each little seam had been hand woven and was filled with images: human animal hybrids, spectral trees, figures draped in white, bridges, mountains, deep blue oceans. It was a paracosm in fabric. A thick, tightly woven gold border lined each side, walling the world. It reminded me of the zari on my mother's best saris. There was a charred hole in the middle, a great emptiness, an abyss. In my family, generations of women would knit worlds into one fabric, said Major. We pass them down to our daughters and granddaughters so that they may tell their stories. I stared. I should have stated this earlier. I'm a writer. Or at 15 at least, I wanted to be. And as is the case with young writers, I never knew where to start. I had ideas, sure, but everyone does. Writing is a little more than that. I've come to agree with Major. Writing is like weaving. There are many parts to a story, and when they're woven well, you can't tell when one thread ends and the other begins. Back then, I only had the cotton balls of ideas. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I sounded like. The greats always talked about their literary voices. I could barely understand that concept. I would write my stories until they ran out 3 pages later and then throw them away. Now I believe killing your art is like a kind of self harm, but I used to think it was a necessary purge. If it wasn't good, it didn't belong. It didn't belong to the story, it didn't belong to you. So I just gaped at Major, stricken by the idea that not only was a woman supposed to think up a story, but also committed to fabric for generations to see. During partition, we took what we could and left, she went on. A piece of the carpet burned in the riots. She finally left her desk and came over to where we stood. I don't know when it started happening, but I've always known they don't sit still. They wander in and out of there whenever they please. What? I stammered. Major blinked at me. Sorry, I thought you could see them. That's why Mari is telling you about this, right? Yes, I think she saw waning gibbous. Who? Mariska looked at me. You know, she said, one of the moon witches. Of course, one of the moon witches, obviously. There were 8, one for each phase. The shyest was New Moon. Nobody had ever seen her because she possessed the power of invisibility. The brightest, their leader, was Full Moon, who guided wanderers to safety at night and commanded the seas to ravage the earth. Together they formed the Dark Council and managed the business of the shadows. Mariska told me they were artists. So every time you see a shadow at twilight or a strange shape on your bedroom floor, it's not an intruder or a monster. It's just the work of the moon witches. They're painting. There were stranger stories. Major described 100-footed beasts and men as tall as blades of grass. She talked about them with shining eyes, her voice lilting. She was in love with these tales. She told me about the Red Priest. Mariska sat next to her grandmother and held her hand. listening to the story like a terrified child instead of the teenager she was. The Red Priest, Major explained, guarded the abyss, the great split in the world, and he filled that void with horrors and miracles that he spun from the nerve threads of his brain. I could see him in the carpet now. His figure stood on guard at the very edge of the hole, his blood-red robes and ashen hair bright like a warning. I stared more closely at the other woven shapes and people and realized finally that I was looking at generations upon generations of stories, each one painstakingly detailed into fabric so that now it was this enormous, intricate universe of its own. This carpet wasn't just a family heirloom. It was centuries of female memory etched into cloth. These were their stories. Maybe they dreamed them up, maybe they lived them, but these were their stories and they were alive. This was enough to make my eyes well up. I was jealous, angry, resentful of Mariska. She had centuries of stories written into her family tree. She was better than me in every way, prettier, more interesting, more eccentric. She had the loveliest hair and the brightest, most expressive eyes, clear skin that no person our age ought to have, and to top it all off, she had a family legacy. What did I have? Just some torn pages in my garbage can. The problem with having a fascinating best friend is that you sometimes envy them more than you love them. I got up and left, resolving never to go back to that house. The next day, I joined them for tea again, the ginger smell overpowering the kitchen. I was still jealous, but I could have stared at that carpet all day, listening to Mariska and Major talk about the characters woven into it. The more I looked, the more I found. There were 10-winged butterflies and thousand-eyed lake monsters, lost rivers wandering across lonely deserts, and food I couldn't recognize, and palaces made from pearls. There were heroes and villains and onlookers, and in the middle of it all, that burnt away hole. Why don't you just fix it? I asked. It's for Mariska to fix, said Major, smiling, when the words come to her. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. It seems like a motif is developing tonight. There are many animals in these stories. We can tell that the writers are not coming from New York City. I particularly identify with the cotton balls of ideas. I have a lot of them. I want to learn how to weave them into the fabric that you suggest. We'll talk more when we get to the conversation, and thank you so much. So again, welcome everyone. You're watching IsoBreak number 14, conceived by Ravi Shankar and co-hosted by Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and New York Writers Workshop. We too host international conferences, and we'd like to welcome you to consider New York Writers Workshop in Athens, coming in May 2022. We'll be in Athens for 7 days with the poet Kim Adonisio, with the illustrious Dr. Shankar, and several other stellar faculty. And then we'll move on down to the island of Ethra. We've learned that Hydra is pronounced Ethra, so we're already gearing up to fit right in with the locals in Greece. Please check out the link to the website and give it some consideration. We were in Sardinia in 2020, about 2 weeks before the pandemic broke, and we had a time that everybody still remembers, and we expect Athens to be just as fantastic. So next up, we turn to Calcalia Yang, coming in from St. Paul, Minnesota. Calcalia is a Hmong American writer. She's the author of the memoirs The Late Homecomer, a Hmong family memoir, The Song Poet, and Somewhere in the Unknown World. She was also the author of the children's books. She is also the author of the children's books, A Map into the World, The Shared Room, The Most Beautiful Thing, and Young Warriors. She co-edited the groundbreaking collection, What God is Honored Here? Writings on Miscarriage and Infant Loss by and for Native women and women of color. Yang's work has been recognized by the National Endowment of the Arts, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Chautauqua Prize, Penn USA Literary Awards, the Dayton's Literary Peace Prize, as notable books by the American Library Association, Kirkus Best Books of the Year, the Heartland Booksellers Award, and garnered 4 Minnesota Book Awards. Calcalia Yang lives in Minnesota with her family and teaches and speaks across the nation. And we're so honored to have her with us tonight. Welcome, Calcalia.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. I am super excited to end my night with you all to begin some of your days. Thank you, Ravi, for inviting me to be a part of tonight's event. This is a new community for me, so I look forward to learning much more about you all. I'm going to read tonight from Somewhere in the Unknown World, a collective refugee memoir. This book came out in 2020, November of 2020, so it is a pandemic book. It continues the work that I've started a long time ago in terms of writing about refugees by refugees. I believe that good writing isn't so much about the information, it is very much about the experience of a life. And so hang with me, we'll get there. I'll just choose a random excerpt and we'll begin there. Dedication. For the refugees from everywhere, men, women, and children, whose fates have been held by the interest of nations, whose rights have been contested and denied, whose thirst and hunger go unheeded and unseen. It opens with a poem by the great American poet Lucille Clifton, Quilting. Somewhere in the unknown world, a yellow-eyed woman sits with her daughter, quilting. Some otherwhere, alchemists mumble over pots. Their chemistry stirs into science. Their science freezes into stone. In the unknown world, the woman threading together her need and her needle nods toward the smiling girl. Remember, this will keep us warm. How does this poem end? Do the daughters quilt? Do the alchemists practice their tables? Do the worlds continue spinning away from each other forever? This excerpt is from a collection or a piece titled Sisters on the Other Side of the River. There was a full moon the night of our crossing. All along the river, families were preparing to enter the water. I had seen two little girls going from family to family. In the moonlight, I could see the people shaking their heads at the girls. I prayed they would not come to us. The older one was 6 or 7 years old. Her scraggly hair fell about her face. She carried the little girl on her back with a length of cloth. The child was 3 or 4, but too weak to walk. In the older girl's arms, she carried a small pot. The little one whimpered occasionally, raising her head weakly, turning it from one side to the other, seeking comfort on the bony back. Her sister was quiet as she walked along the line of families. It was impossible to ignore them. I had just blown up the raft and was tying my children together when the girls walked toward us. In the light of the moon, reflected off the surface of the river, I saw her eyes, big and round in her sunken face. She offered what was in her pot to me before her words came out. She said, "This is all I have left in the world, this little bit of rice, and the little sister on my back. Our mother and father, our aunts and uncles and grandparents were killed in the jungle. We are alone. We've traveled for the last 5 days on our own to get here." I said, "I can't help you, I'm sorry." She persisted. "I will give you this rice if you carry my baby sister with your family to the other side. I know it is not much, but it is all I have left." I said again, this time with more roughness in my voice, because my children could hear her, "I'm sorry, but there's no room on the raft." The girl's thin arms shook with the proffered rice in the near empty pot. Her little sister turned her head at the roughness of my voice to look at me. Those eyes, too, were large and dark like a little monkey's. They glistened at me, wet with tears. The older girl fell to her knees, looked as if her thin legs had given out from under her. Her head was bowed, and she begged, "Please, uncle, you don't have to take me. I'm willing to die here, on this side of the river. I would die happy knowing my sister is safe. Please, uncle." I shook my head at her, my own words now wet and sticky in my throat. The girl turned to my wife, who had our baby girl strapped to her front, and said, "Please, auntie, please." She started to cry. We were the last family at the river's edge. Her cries turned into sobs. My wife's arm tightened around our little baby's body. We had had a 3-year-old daughter. A year after the Americans left in an abandoned village by a rushing river, she died in a drowning accident after a night of heavy rainfall. It was my wife who found her body, floating away from our house, her shirt tangled up with a fallen tree. After our daughter's death, we thought we would never have another little girl in our life. What spirit would choose parents like us, a man and a woman who could not protect their children? Our daughter had laughter like the songs of the birds, and dark hair that blossomed about her face like a flower in bloom. Her tiny hands and feet had danced in the air when she ran, recalling the flight of butterflies. Her scent was fresh as the citrus blooms that fell about the orchard or the long grass after a night of light rain. Her soft touch was full of warmth. Her words contained vistas of possibility. All these were gone when she died. Still, somehow, in this horrible war, in the wet of the jungle, with the hunger and the fear from up high in the sky, in her chase after the clouds, a baby girl spirit had seen us and chosen us. Our new one who entered our life healthy and strong, gave us faith and strength to continue our long trek through the jungle to this river bank with our boys. I stood in front of the girl on her knees and my shaking wife. I said, "Little girl, we have to go into the river now. The soldiers are coming. You take your sister and you go hide in the jungle. When other families come, you ask them. Someone will help you. We can't." Her shoulders shook with her cries. She had no more words for us. The rice in the pot was in danger of spilling. I took hold of it with my hands. I put it down beside her. I said to my boys and my wife, "Hurry up." I turned from the girls and I pushed the raft into the river. I picked up my boys one by one and dropped them onto the raft. I helped my wife and our baby daughter strapped to her front onto the raft. The flimsy thing nearly toppled. I could hear the other men hurrying their families into the current. A voice called out, "The soldiers are coming." I felt a tug on my shirt. I had hoped the girl would have walked away, taken my words to heart, found a place to hide. I had hoped hopelessly. She stepped into the river after me. I did not have the heart to pry those fingers loose, so I said, "I'll come back for you both, I promise. As soon as I get my children and my wife to the other side, I will turn back for you. Just wait here." Her fingers fell from my shirt. My wife echoed my words to the girls, my children too. I turned to the girls one last time and placed my hands on each of their heads, a sign of love. I looked into their eyes and I believed myself. I would come back for them. The water was cold against my legs. The cold climbed higher as I walked farther into the river. My feet lost touch with the river's bottom. I treaded water. I kicked water. Somewhere at the halfway point of the crossing, floating in the Mekong River, I clung to the raft and looked back at the girls. I could see they were still standing in the river, both staring straight ahead toward me. Their small pot of rice sat on the bank. Every few minutes, I looked back at them until they disappeared from view, until they were nothing more than lines of shadows in the moonlit night. There was the cracking of guns from the tree line. The soldiers had arrived. I called out to the ancestors, the spirits of the earth and the water, to please keep the girls safe, to please let a better man than me come their way. I kicked at the water with everything I had and pushed toward the other shore. On Thailand's side, we lay down on the soft bank of the Mekong River, my chest heaving. I looked up at the sky. The night was fading. The earliest hint of morning sun was chasing the darkness from the horizon. Slivers of pink, orange, yellow, and blue bled into the canvas of the heavens. My family was huddled on the soft turf beside me. When I could, I pushed myself up. There was barely anything visible on the other bank, just shadows moving like men yelling into the distance, their guns in their hands. There was no sign of the girls anywhere, no little pot of rice to be seen. I'll skip to the closing. Um, you're doing well for yourself and your family. You are a good man, people tell me. They don't know the truth. They don't know that nearly 40 years ago, on the banks of the Mekong River, on my way to freedom, I condemned two sisters to war. They don't know that I cannot forget those two girls, their eyes that night round like the moon in the high sky, looking at me. The lie I told, the lie I carry. They don't know that one day soon, when my time comes, I will look into those eyes again and, and see the knowledge that I was not the man the sisters have been waiting for, that I could not be him. I pray and I hope that in another life, beneath a different moon, I will be the man to turn that raft around. And that is one of the stories from Somewhere in the Unknown World, a collective refugee memoir. Because while Minnesota is not big on diversity, we have more refugees per capita in the state than any across the nation. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you so much for reading Calcalia. I feel like I'm in a spell. Um, I'm loving the music of the voices that we're hearing tonight from all over the world, and that was quite hypnotic. Thank you so much. We'll have a further chat at the other end of the evening. You may have noticed that as we go on story by story, reader by reader, we're getting links into the chat. So please do check out the work of our writers tonight. The work is available either to read online or to purchase. I'm Tim Tomlinson from New York Writers Workshop, and this is IsoBreak number 14. I'm filling in tonight for the founder of the program, Ravi Shankar, my colleague at New York Writers Workshop and at APWT. And Ravi is in the audience watching and listening and overseeing. And also, I think, trying to throw me curveballs because he never sent me a bio. So he wants to see if I can do a little tap dance out of memory. I'm not going to tap dance, but I will say Ravi is a great friend and a great inspiration and a great figure in the world of global literature. And he has been for so many years. I actually knew of Ravi before I met Ravi. And then I met Ravi in Minnesota, actually, at a reading at the AWP conference many years ago. And he was such a trooper. He was schlepping up to a stage with an ankle boot on. I think he had just come back from the slopes. And it seems like Ravi doesn't know how to ski, but he likes to do it. So he comes home with injuries and he troops on despite those. I'm going to turn it over to Ravi because I know he'll have a few things to say about all the wonderful things that are going on with his work and with work in general with these two organizations. I look forward to the reading. I'll just leave us with one further thought that Ravi is developing a formidable collection of hats. I'm going to be looking online at my hat dealership so I can keep up with him. Thank you. Welcome, Ravi.
Oh, I did not realize that I was muted the whole. So sorry you missed a really brilliant monologue and setup. So, I will just actually start. I will save all of what I was saying, and I had sketched out just the brief parameters of the book, but I was taking us to right when I have to do these 90 days of pretrial detention while I'm being promoted to full professor. And this is the start of that time. And I can talk to you more about the memoir in a second. An Unexpected Commencement. I emerged from the caged elevator to the basement of the courthouse where my freedom has officially been surrendered. I'm searched for the first of many times that day by a brisk marshal who pats me down like a furniture appraiser looking for defects in an antique bureau. He confiscates my silk tie, my boots, and my shoelaces, none of which I'll ever get back, and leads me into a communal cell that smells of sour milk. I'm about to begin my time in jail. The only other person is a black man sitting on the floor. In his ripped sweatshirt and camouflage fatigues, he looks attired for a street war. I'm not eager to gauge what he thinks of me in my collared herringbone shirt and wool slacks. He doesn't bother to lift his head when I enter, but sings his greeting nonetheless. We headed at HCC, bro. That's Hartford Correctional. Don't get it twisted and keep it professional. Throw me 2 bids up there, nothing but clown shit. That's county jail. We'll have to wait until court ends and more disconsolate prisoners file in before we transported to HCC. I perch on my length of metal bench, screwing my face into an imitation of fierce. 5 more black men, 3 Hispanic men, and a white plumber's apprentice have filled the barred space with their curses and odors. We're given rubbery bologna sandwiches on white bread and processed orange drink, and as a lifelong vegetarian, my first act of communion with these other men is to share out the wealth. When it feels like I can't wait a minute longer, the marshal appears. He seems to know many of my fellow cellmates, if not by name, then by crime. Yo, Norco, you back here? He shouts. And you, restraining order? One by one, we're lined up single file, our palms flat against the wall, and our legs spread so that we can be searched again. This marshal removes our individual leg irons and fastens us together chain gang style, our right ankle attached to the left one of the man in front of us. We're marched into the sally port where a prison van waits. The black man in camos begins to hum a tune recognizable from ice cream trucks in the suburbs. His outburst earns him a, "Shut up, you dumb fuck," and all of us a sharp tug, causing us to stumble into the back of the man in front of us. To step into the truck, we have to synchronize, lift our legs up, and scoot together. It's a grudging exercise in humility. Once inside, I understand why they call this the ice cream truck. The air conditioning blasts the metal seats icy as the Turk lurches out of the sally port. Shoulder to shoulder, we smash into one another in lurching waves of pavement. The outside world beckons in tiny pinpricks in the reinforced steel of the back door. Probably be midnight before we see the dorm. Straight want to bet? Give me odds, 10 to 1. Last time it took 4 hours to process. That's no joke. I would later wish that Camo Man had more hyperbole in him. We arrive at Hartford Correctional Center and are led up a ramp and into a brightly lit hallway dotted with cells, the faces of shadowy men pressing up against them. I try to shift the ordeal into an aesthetic experience, an act of immersion journalism, but I fail. Waiting on another length of bench to be unshackled, I'm panicked and exhausted, barely holding it together. Once we're uncuffed, we're thrust into a bullpen filled with men in no mood to talk. My head swims in a fog of exhausted unknowing. After a long while, I'm called forward, identified, fingerprinted, photographed, and like part of a cattle herd stored in another bullpen. Then I'm told to strip, to trade my laceless shoes for a pair of black martial arts style slippers, which I'd learned were called Jackie Chan's or Skippies. I stand naked in front of a correctional officer or CO in an open cubicle. He asks me to spread my ass cheeks and to lift my balls. Check him out, Ramirez, the CO processing me sniggers, seeing my hairy body. This won't come with a built-in sweater. My court clothes go into a box and I'm given a tan uniform a little too tight and short. When I sit down outside a set of double doors marked emergency, a skinny guy with rasping breath and horn-rimmed glasses sits next to me. Hey, I'm Jay. You new here, right? He speaks as if we might be office mates at a corporate law office. I let you know what's about to go down. We're not headed to the dorms or the blocks. Summertime in Hartford, shit be crazy. Never seen it so crowded in here. My boy, he said they're putting guys on the gym floor now. We wait to speak to the male nurse who takes my vitals disinterestedly and asks me very few questions. The mental health counselor asks even fewer. I hesitate when asked if I've ever contemplated ideas of self-harm. By the time we're given a bedroll and directed to follow a CO, I don't know the hour. After all that waiting, we are through a gauntlet of metal detectors. We walk past what looks like a mural of the world begun by children and then abandoned so that Eastern Europe trails off into the cinder block. Wait behind me in a single file, the CO commands. He searches his utility belt for a key. When he opens the double door, the yawning space before us is indeed a poorly lit gymnasium. Dozens of dark shapes loom on the floor, resolving into the shapes of men, a small village's worth. We sleeping on boats. Holy mother, no, Jay groans. Worse than I thought. They got us on the gym floor. Around me is a mass of fellow human beings in jagged rows. Few of them are covered completely, wrapped in blankets like corpses, and others are on their mattresses, shivering, snoring, or going through what might be termed mild seizure. Some men are huddled together or gesturing in the air with unmistakable, inscrutable resolve. Others are splayed out prone, eerily motionless. Near the rear of the gym, I'm given my own flame-retardant mattress and a gray plastic boat, a stackable bunk without any component parts that could be weaponized. I anchor next to 100 other men on the floor. This can't be legal under the city's fire code. I'm exhausted. It's the middle of the night, but the fluorescent lights are still on. It's pure pretense to give COs some light for medical emergency because their main purpose is to create sensory deprivation. I spread my sheet and blanket atop the mattress of the plastic boat, rolling the extra t-shirt into a lumpy pillow. What I see around me looks like makeshift shelter from a nuclear fallout. I notice some of the other men somehow have acquired possessions that spill out over the sides of their bed, pyramids of balled up toilet paper or mildewing styrofoam cups from which the stub ends of pencils stargaze. Others have flipped their bunk to make an impromptu card table and sit in knots throwing spades and diamonds. One man, shrouded in his blanket like a Bedouin, stares expectantly at the television housed in plexiglass, even though it's not turned on. Two COs sit behind a glassed-off area inaccessible only by intercom next to a bathroom that looks like a busted-up mouth with two of the three stalls missing doors. Jay crouches next to me conspiratorially. Just you wait. Some senator or fire inspector come through and they'll send us out to the rec yard to hide the boats. This shit is straight illegal. But summertime in Hartford, Gold Coast to broke gas, who cares what's legal? I'm thankful Jay's boat is many quadrants away, since in the few hours I've come to know him, he has asked me for tissues, to make a phone call for him, and whether I could help him buy some pills. His manner of asking for something reflexively presupposes assent, a junkie trait I will come to recognize in time. For now, engulfed in a miasma of fear, shame, and humiliation, balled up on state-issued sheets, trying not to think about the grim reality of the next months, I can only sense the world in terms of relative danger. For the most part, Jay seems innocuous, even intelligent, and is a source of perpetual new information, so I would be glad to have him as a confidant during the day. But for now, I need to sleep with half an eye open and wish him away. It's the summer of 2014. Right now, I would be asleep in my own queen-size bed after having spent the afternoon outside riding bikes with my daughters or swimming in Cedar Lake, dining out with one of my restaurant reviewer friends. I could walk in socks to the fridge for a cold drink of water or turn earth over one of my raised bed gardens. Instead, I'm scared and sleepless where the night snakes slither. And from where I lie, I can see more unfinished murals. The outline of a spindly man with African features hoisting a basketball midair with his legs bent in classic Jerry West fashion, his body not quite colored in, the glinting almond eyes of a heavily furred and growling Siberian husky dog, its body curving into a sickle that trails off at the forepaws, half-begun rendition of the Great Seal of the state of Connecticut, with only the first twining of a grape plant visible under the Latin motto of the state, which is rendered in full, Qui translucit sustinit, he who transplanted sustains. Transplanted, I had not sustained. I would never have the steel or judgmental streak of those Puritan forebears who still live today. Yet, how could I be one of the men that I'm surrounded by? I'm an Ivy League educated college professor, a homeowner, A recurrent thought way for the ego to surf, but then I look down at my raft, at my chest. I know I'm no different than these other men. Inmate number 396964, designated by the Department of Corrections, laminate ID clipped to my tans. My outside credentials don't mean squat in here. I'm indubitably one of them, awake in the middle of the night, looking perplexedly at the rafters of the ceiling and what seemed like 4 spotlights bearing down on those rows of brown and black faces into whose continuum mine surely fits. Still, I'm not one of them. I'm not. It's impossible. I want to convince myself. I want to fall asleep like Rip Van Winkle and awaken on the other side of this sandbar of time on which I've suddenly been beached. My new home, a post-industrial dugout. I stare at the lights until an uneasy sleep overtakes me. On any given day, Hartford Correctional Center has about 1,000 inmates in residence. It's opened in 1977, 2 years after I was born. It's one of the 20-odd jails in Connecticut whose names I will gain a familiarity with from listening to the other inmate stories. Osborne, Northern, Carl Robinson, the mythic gates on the banks of a lake in Niantic where on a good day you could see the girl prisoners from York taking their morning stroll. HCC is located on a stretch of urban ramble next to various car dealerships, fast food restaurants, seedy-looking motels, and enormous post office where much of the state's mail is sorted. Driving by on the road, you might not even notice it except for the glinting barbed wire encircling the ground. According to the DOC website, HCC is a level 4 high-security urban jail that holds primarily pretrial male offenders and serves superior courts in Bristol, Enfield, Hartford, Manchester, Middletown, New Britain, Rockville, and West Hartford. In short, county jail. It's not the real thing. Not the place hardened criminals go to do real time where you have to walk around with 2 sharpened shanks at all times because you don't know who's going to jump you. Place like Cheshire, Jay informs me. Hero doing straight life ain't gonna think twice about slicing you up on account of you reaching over his plate to pass you bread. Real talk. I'm being housed with the low-level offenders in level 1, those incarcerated for breach of peace or criminal mischief, along with those still waiting to be sentenced. Jay assures me that I will have nothing to fear here. Not in this correctional, Jay spits dismissively. Pure carnival joke shit. Joke shit or not, my mind obsesses over the sequence of events that has landed me here. I veer from astonishment to self-pity, seeing the shadowy center that lurks beneath my philosophical anarchism and the vestiges of Brahmin exceptionalism. In modern-day America, adding together the number of people in prison and jail with those under parole or probation supervision, 1 in every 31 adults, or 3.2% of the country's population, is under some form of correctional control. Call us the 3%ers. I rue not taking probation more seriously. I rue not having kissed my daughters one more time. I rue booze. I rue my impulsivity. I rue the 46 and a half days I have left to go. Rue, rue, rue your boat. I awaken only to close my eyes again, lying adrift in the stench of men, slowly passing time. I wonder about how I'll survive the full 3 months worth. And I'll just skip right to the end of this chapter. On the back of one stall that still has a door, there's some jailhouse humor. Someone has scrawled a desperate plea in wavering letters. I need hope. Someone else has crossed out the H and replaced it with a D, so it reads, I need dope. Someone else has altered that sentiment even further, turning it into, I need rope, with a noose alongside it. Finally, in large bubble letters, the kind used to tag the underside of a bridge with spray paint, someone has written a coda to the entire conversation. Nope, suckers, you need soap. I can't piss, so I return to a King James Bible on my boat. I have borrowed it from Bill, a red-nosed white dude who just got his 5th DUI. I'm flipping through the pages at random and my eyes stop at Psalms 22:14. I write down one of the verses on the back of an inmate request form, the first words I would write down during my stay at HCC. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted in the midst of my bowels. Poured out in waves of anxiety, I feel like I've swallowed a candle. Slowly I grow pliable, drowsy, but just as I'm about to plunge into sleep, I hear my bed number and name blared out of the megaphone. Bed number 31, Hernandez. Bed number 38, Lloyd. Bed number 47, Shankar. Bed number 48, Montrell. Move your ass, fellas. Line up at the door, bail commissioner time. She's a woman of about 45, hair coiled in a tight bun, who looks familiar to me, as if I might have met her in the library. If she recognizes me, however, she doesn't show it. Instead, she runs a fingernail down my documentation. Looks like you're a level 2 low-risk assessment with 2 detainers on you, but your bond is only $15,000. Can't you pay that? You only need 10%, probably even less, 3%. A bail bondsman could put you on a payment plan. You could probably be out of here for a few $100. Can't you find someone to post this for you? I shouldn't even try, but I try to compress the improbable sequence of events to her, ending with the pretrial confinement of 90 days that I'm in the midst of enduring. She listens without any expression on her face. So you could pay the bond if you wanted? I nod. But you prefer to remain jailed? I nod again. Well, good luck. The next inmate replaces me on the bench. When I return to the gymnasium, there's a pheromonal odor in the air. Against the walls within the murals, I see two COs straddling the back of a large black man with an ink tear frozen under his left eye. Next to him, a bald white guy slumps. He's already in cuffs, his left eye socket scraped purple, his pug nose dripping blood and large globs onto his hands. A small cadre of COs encircles them, one of them pointing a camera at the bleeding man. All the inmates have gathered around with interest, but the COs are keeping them away. Jay is exactly where I expect to find him, right in the middle of the action. When he sees me, he gesticulates wildly. I told you, bro. He waves as if cheering a touchdown. The pedo got beat down just like I said. Batman pounded his face. You missed a good one, sweet mother. Right cross, holy Jesus, left uppercut. Now they both off to say. He means administrative segregation, also known as solitary confinement. Back to your beds. Now, ain't nothing more to look at here, CO snarls after Jay's animated broadcast. We disperse back to our boats till I stretched out once more on the floor, something I've not done regularly since I was a child in India, when I would spend summer nights sleeping on a straw mat on the floor or on some uncle's rooftop. Under the mats, there's a fresh streak of fresh blood. To my surprise, I find that I'm disappointed to have missed the fight and then instantly horrified at my disappointment. Less than a full day into my time at HCC, and the place has already begun to disfigure me.
Ravi, thank you so much. I was thinking along the same lines as my wife that it's just astonishing to picture you in jail on a day when Kyle Rittenhouse walked free. We'll get to that later. We'll get to that trauma and that farce later. Thank you so much, Ravi. Again, I'm Tim Tomlinson, filling in for Ravi for tonight's reading. And you're watching IsoBreak number 14, co-hosted by New York Writers Workshop and Asia Pacific Writers and Translators. And we're going to move to our final reader for the evening, Sally Breen. I could probably tap dance a bio for Sally. She's just as much of an inspiration and a love for me. But I'll give you some of the official story. Sally is an Australian writer, editor, and academic, author of the iconic grunge memoir, The Casuals, winner of the Varuna HarperCollins Manuscript Prize, and the novel Atomic City, shortlisted for the QLD Premier's People's Choice Book of the Year. Sally's short-form, creative, and nonfiction work has been published widely, with features in The Guardian London, Asia Literary Review, Griffith Review, The Age, Overland, The Australian, Best Australian Stories, Sydney Review of Books, Hemingway Shorts, The Age, and The Conversation. Sally is the executive director of Asia Pacific Writers and Translators and senior lecturer in writing and publishing at Griffith University. Her most recent publications are Don't You Know You've Got Legs, a Gold Coast surf culture manifesto in Lines to the Horizon, out now with Fremantle Press, and On the Road Where Stories Meet in the latest issue of Griffith Review. And I'll turn it over to Sally in 1 second. I'll just say that Sally visited New York City maybe 3 years ago. It seems like such a long time ago. And read for New York Writers Workshop at the KGB bar. People are still talking about that reading. It was a phenomenal performance. I look forward to tonight's event. Take it away, Sally.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, that was a highlight reading for me as well. Hope to see you again in New York soon. Just before I read, and it's so lovely to be sharing the stage with so many incredible writers tonight. Usually I'm on the other side organizing things. So this is very nice to share that with you. APWT is an international networking organization that's dedicated to raising the profile of Asia Pacific literatures. And it is membership driven, and I see a lot of members here today. For some reason, I can't figure out how to put a comment in there. So hello, I am seeing your comments, and it's lovely to see you all there. If you're not a member of APWT, perhaps Ravi can drop in the link to the membership page on our website. If you'd like to be involved in things like this and our annual conference and some of the other initiatives that we have going, you need to be a member and join that community and become involved. So thank you to all our members that are here and out there. You really are the life force of APWT, and in a post-pandemic, or it's continuing, isn't it? But world, we're very happy that we've survived. Many organizations have not, and we hope to see everyone in person again in India next year, later in the year. And some of those details are yet to be finalized, but fingers crossed, we'll be back next year. So yeah, we'd love to meet more of you out there and welcome you to APWT. So my piece today is, oh, sorry. I should also say that Schoolies Week started here right in the middle of Surfers Paradise where I lived last night. And so if it sounds like I'm caught in the middle of a riot at some point, I think they're all sleeping at the moment. It's kind of like a spring break thing, but thousands of school leavers have descended on my suburb. So apologies in advance if there's anything untoward going on in the background, but that's the soundtrack of my life for the next 2 weeks. So this piece is creative nonfiction. It is inspired by lived experience, in keeping with the theme for the reading tonight. I was inspired by the Me Too movement, and I am working on something new, which is a collection of personal essays about women and women writers and the creative process. This piece is called The Publisher. Part of you knew that you'd end up here with Alec, with his tongue inside your mouth, but part of you'd held out hope that you wouldn't. You know that kind of thinking is naive, that the dreams spooling from your head are snakes and he's in control of the ladders, that if you hesitate or look back, you'll be salt blown away into nothing, that you got to stay curious, stay for the conversation, for how the wine is liquid gold in your glass, for how Alec's world is a window onto elegance. Back at the share house, the boys will be playing 4-person shooter games or watching endless pirated episodes of Family Guy, choking on bongs and eating chicken and corn. And you're here with Alec, in a hotel that is its own golden city, in a view that would price out your monthly income in a night, in an expansive muted restaurant with velvet seats and waiters who know how to appear and disappear. Deep chocolate cocoon, where everything rests in its rightful place. The big spoons and the little ones, the cocktail fork and the knife. How the waiter brushes the crumbs from the bread you break onto a little silver tray. How your legs against the velvet are so young. At home, you would have been watching your lover play in his peeled tracksuit pants, no shoes, washboard abs retreating every time he wrestles with the controller, smiling over at you when he kills someone. This fascination with Alec is different. It has nothing to do with wanting to eat him or touch him or even like him. It is about what you think he sees in you. And what you want him to see is this mountain of how you write, how you've been scratching out signals in the rock for years and nothing doing. How a man like him can push a contract across a table and suddenly you're in a cable car and that mountain is nothing. How fast you lift. In the reflection of your face in the mirror beyond his head, in the shiny patch on the waiter's lapel, is your dream. Alec has heard you scratching in the rock. He's sent the rope down. And the whole time you're being entertaining and telling stories and trying not to sink too deep into that cocoon or admit you're a little bored by him. The whole time you're thinking about your dream. Your dream is sitting there in the corner of the restaurant, watching the sea salt explosion of an oyster sliding down your throat. And by the end of the meal, after the dessert wine and the petrified grapes, your dream has gotten so big, it is hovering over the room, enormous and purple and resting on all the other diners like silk, though they can't see it yet. Your dream is brushing up against Alec's dusty cheek and dangling between the tables, billowing, and Alec's looking at you and nodding because you think he can see it too. After dinner, you'll wander with him by the hotel's enormous pool, your body languid from the wine, from the effect of being dropped into this glowing tank you'd only ever admired from the outside. Palm fronds bulging against your bare shoulders, rocks glowing underwater, light glistening off of scales, reef fish careening away from the echo of your heels and the shadows you throw. Somehow the fish stay alive in this beautiful fake sea, confused by the curved walls of blue concrete that should yield, but never do. Nothing about Alec suggests he might be scaly underneath. The cashmere sweater, the pleated slacks, the navy blazer. But when he comes closer, scaly is how he feels. When he pushes you into the trunk of a palm tree without warning, he is a creature come out of the deep, not like the reef fish, but something gelatinous, released from a deeper hole. An impeccable English gentleman, slimy as moss underneath. And it surprises you that someone so worldly, so old, could not know how to kiss. That his little English mouth and his little English lips could feel so cavernous. And in the few seconds when you allow his tongue to roam around inside you, you think of falling back into the pool, just to be free of him. To sink into a wading school of angelfish and have them carry you away. Instead, you put both your hands on his sunken chest and push. In the cab, you notice a tiny bit of purple caught on the hem of your dress. Years later, you'll see Alec at a writers' festival in Sydney when you have half a toe inside your dream. And you'll be watching him when he says, "Oh, what beautiful creatures." Gazing up at his female assistants, descending a staircase, all flush and glittery in their silver dresses and sparkly eyeshadows, ready for the free party he has thrown. And you'll think of those startled reef fish stuck in the hotel pool when he rammed you into that tree, not used to a woman telling him no. He wants you to see what happens next. That's why he's called you over. Not just to emphasize how you missed your opportunity all those years ago, that much is clear. He wants to let you know your rejection has had no effect on anyone but you. moving towards all those tinkly young women, arms outstretched. Thank you.
Brilliant, Sally. Thank you so much. That was chilling, and it's sad to see my friends, the reef fish, accompanying such a nasty narrative, but beautifully done. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for a fantastic set of readings. And thank you too, Sally, for reminding us that the theme tonight is life writing. And I thought I might just throw a question out there to get things going in reference to the theme. I was just saying to someone this morning that I was wondering if fear of news has become a phobia identified in the DSM. It's getting more and more difficult to turn on the TV or open a newspaper and find out what's going on. So I'm wondering how you guys feel the current moment, however you define that, is having an effect in any way whatsoever on what you might call life writing. And maybe we can start with whoever wants to go first, please. Please, yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, the current moment, and I speak here in the American context as a first-generation refugee within its borders. In light of the coronavirus, many people in my community, and here I speak about Asian Americans, have experienced a great deal of violence. Here in the US, and I've seen videos from abroad as well, of mistreatment, of hate, of racial injustice. You know, one of the saddest things for me is I love this ice cream shop in the cities. It was a place where my grandmother, who's no longer with us, but she used to take my older sister and I there. For 59 cents, you could get an ice cream cone. It's this beloved place that one day I thought, I'm going to take my children there. We've been waiting for a special day. But of course, at the beginning of this pandemic, a Hmong man was brutally beat up there for having come from China. Of course, this is not true. For carrying the coronavirus into the country, but brutally beat up. That landscape of my youth, I think, was damaged. And I had to make a decision, Tim, that I will not let the space be taken over by violence. That as soon as the weather warms, I will take my children there. And when I write the story of that place, it will end. It will end with a sweet taste of those cones melting on their tongues, just as it was in my youth. This has been a period where I've had to make decisions. I'm a soft-spoken person, you know, but in the world that we belong to, this soft voice of mine has had to do work that I never imagined it would. At 40, I figure I only have 40 years left if I'm lucky to do this kind of work in the world, to be this kind of example of what I think integrity and care and love can be like, moving, working within the page and above it. And so it's been a great moment of coming into my own as a writer, as a public speaker, as a teacher. Lots of decisions have been made about the kind of character I will be in the book of A Bigger World.
So that's good. You're turning a negative into a kind of positive. It's wonderful to hear. Who else?
Well, I can just jump in also from this context, and I think you had the Kyle Rittenhouse trial on your mind, but of course it's a larger political desolation that exists here. I mean, I think that as writers, I think that the work we do can be to change hearts and minds. I mean, that's at least while I've been doing these book tours, hopefully correction is not just this dead artifact, but actually a mechanism to make us agitate and activate for real change if we want to have a more equitable world. And you know, I'm very nervous about the Arbery case, if that, which just seems so clear cut, you know, and this is, I mean, in Australia, the indigenous population was over policed, and I spoke to people there who reflected very much what is happening in the U.S. But for me, I mean, writing this book and doing this work, we all realize this, but the U.S. has about 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's incarcerated people, and so more than China and North Korea. And then when you overlay that with the racial demographic of who is being arrested and the sentences they're given, it's a really bleak picture, and it's one that I think should have us really agitated and in the streets about. And so, I think, and the other part of, I guess for me, life writing means I do want my next project not to be focused on myself, but there is a conversation about appropriation that we could have as well when it comes to this. But maybe pass it to Helen or Dominique.
Shall I go?
Please.
How's that volume? Because I'm aware. Is that okay? The volume a little bit lower. I live in this bubble of a place called Byron Bay, which is nothing like being in the States or in Melbourne or Sydney. So I'm kind of in a cocoon, in a sense, a COVID cocoon. But even here, there's this really strong sense of the other, and such a polarization in a community that I've never experienced before, which if you're writing and you're immersing into the voice of the other, whether that be yourself or another person, I think that there's great power in that. And we're living in a dystopian novel right now, aren't we? So yeah, I saw this work of art the other day. It was one book, and the artist had built a brick wall on top of that book. The book was still intact, but the wall it's like a root coming out of a concrete pavement. The wall was climbing over the book. It was a very powerful statement as to what literature can do, what a voice can do, what if you can read and be immersed in a sense of the other. I think that's probably one of the most powerful things a writer can do at this point in time.
Yeah, I would add to that. I feel as if it's important for writers also to understand that difference between reality as it is played out in the world and the way in which narrative is constructed. And so I think it's important not to become too hysterical and to understand, as many artists from the past have, that hysteria related to an age is often the enemy of art, because it starts to strangle the art, and it becomes an obsessive cause which can annihilate a kind of understanding of your own complicity. We're all complicit in the current project. We're not outside of it, and that's kind of how I try to view. And in that piece, I reference my own complicity. I'm not trying to be holier than thou. And I think at this moment, it's important that we recognize that we work in a world of literature, not politics. We're not politicians. Our work is literature. And does it compete with the current culture? I don't know. Can literature still change the world? Maybe. It certainly helps us and our readers, but can it compete with Instagram and Netflix? I don't know.
I've been trying to think about what it means to be hopeful. Personally, I basically stopped reading the news since COVID because it got to a point where I could not function. And even when we talk about the second wave of COVID that happened in India, it was, I think, the most traumatic thing to have been witness to, at least for me, because you had people, there was this absolutely devastating video I saw on the BBC about this woman basically screaming at her brother to breathe. And I still think about that from time to time. So since then, I've just had to step back, and I've just been thinking about, what can writers do to sort of protect hope, because I don't see it very much, and I don't think too many young people feel hopeful anymore. If you look at things like, for instance, the so-called Great Resignation that's taking place, I think all over the world, where people are just quitting their jobs now. I think that is in part because people are worried about climate change and things that they can't control, and the excesses of capitalism. And they sort of say, well, you know what, forget it. If the world is going to go to hell, then I might just quit this job and do something I actually love. And that's kind of what I come back to, because um, I can't change the world. I don't know if literature can change the world. I don't know if stories can, but the one thing I do know is that if I write a story that makes me feel a little less devastated, or it makes someone else feel a little less devastated, then at least that's something. At least that's something to hold on to from one day to the next. That's what I try to focus on these days when I write.
Yeah, I think you have to. I'm noticing in the chat a note from one of the APWT members, Eve Stafford, that hope versus despair is a conversation happening absolutely everywhere at the moment. At the moment, abbreviated ATM, and ATMs are a major factor in our lives over here as well. I think we're in a transitional moment in America. We may be in a transitional moment in more places than the U.S., but the U.S. really feels as if it's on the brink. And the Kyle Rittenhouse decision, I think, has made a very volatile situation much more frightening. I was in the gym a couple of days ago, and some guy that I've worked out with a whole bunch finally asked me what I did, and I told him I'm a writer, and he wanted to look my work up on Google. And on the way home, I was thinking, am I going to get a 45-pound plate dropped on my head the next time I go to the gym? Or because we've never talked about politics. I think inevitably politics emerges from what we write. Robbie, I'm going to ask you if you can make a call on this. We're at almost 90 minutes. Do we have time for another question and then the customary sign off, or what do you think?
I think this is a pretty rich conversation. So I think another question and then the sign off.
Okay. Yeah. I want to use your customary fortune cookie bye-bye, especially as this is the grand finale of the year. One of the things that occurred to me listening to Ravi's piece is the coarse humanity of the inmates and Ravi's recreation of their dialogue. Much of it's indelicate, and I imagine that that kind of speech would be frowned on in many of the places that we all visit on a regular basis, certainly in my university. And I'm wondering, is there a way to open up our community and to admit, Ravi, I forget your phrase, you had such a beautiful way of putting it, but the humanity of the people that you bump into in other communities who have a different way of speaking, but they have a common humanity with us all. I feel a lot of this roughness is being excluded and judged, and there's an enormous blowback because of that.
There's this phrase, particularly in hiring, intentional inclusion. And I think that's kind of an important principle to keep in mind, because I mean, some of these men that I met might have been smoking a joint on the street and gotten arrested and couldn't bond out, and then lost their job. I mean, one of them missed the birth of his child, and then has a criminal record and now can't get a job to provide for his family. And so, I mean, the more I dug into it, I don't like to be a conspiracy theorist, but it really feels like we're investing intentionally in a broken system. in a system that it has been, I mean, I don't think it's a great coincidence in US history, at least, that the two great moments of explosion of prison growth, one came after the Civil War in the post-Reconstructionist South, and the other came right after the Civil Rights Movement in the 1970s. And so in both cases, it's kind of a way of controlling and suppressing a portion of the population. Many of these men, I definitely, had really rich stories. I mean, some of them had mental health issues or substance abuse issues, neither of which were being addressed in there. And I felt like, some of them had ingenious ideas, and there was this community. They were rough-hewn, but you would see these men in with tattoos and braiding each other's hair on the prison bench and cooking for one another. There was this community in spite of the state, which was trying to grind it out of them. And so, I know there are some prison education programs. I mean, at Hartford Correctional, they were not, they're frowned upon. I, of course, said I would teach in the schools, and my requests were ignored. But yes, that rough language, as you say, Tim, I think that if you can provide an entry or access for many of these men and women, and certainly, I mean, the amount of money that we spend incarcerating in the U.S. is insane. It's risen by 3 times as much as what we spend on educating people, and so that absolutely has to change.
I think the point you make, Tim, about rawness is important. Language is a music. It is a kind of music, and when Ravi was reading and inhabiting those characters, there's just such a beauty in that language. And I think it's a tragedy that a kind of PC, elitist shroud is settling over the literary world, where we've gotten to a point where speaking like that becomes an issue or a problem. I mean, this is the language of the street. If you disenfranchise that in a literary community, then what are we here for? I mean, that music is so important, and I think, there's a bit of PC-ness around that stuff. I think the way that people truly speak, it should be in literature, and not some sort of false construction of this world that, where people are constructing these very beautiful sentences, but are they necessarily representative?
Yeah, I was very happy to see some of that course speech captured in the collection of short stories by the Cambodian American Anthony Wiesma-So, whose voice is both elevated and vernacular, and entertainingly so. Calcalia, any insights?
So it's a roundabout way of thinking about the question, but I think it gets to the heart of it. As a stateless person, as a refugee, my political status is politics. My face is politics. My form is politics. Yes, I have a face that looks like it belongs across all of Asia, but I'm here in America, right? So whether we choose to be political or not is sometimes not a choice. And as a writer, I think, particularly in this current moment, I cannot shy away from the fact that I embody certain truths for certain people and certain exclusive dislike, if you will. But the thing I've learned about being a stateless child born in a refugee camp as a new American trying to make my way into a new language from entirely different language, Tim, is that my accent travels with me. You can hear the hint of Minnesotan. You can hear the hint of Hmong in my approach to the language, right? In English, we're taught that the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. Not so for the Hmong language. I'm going to take you on a ride. I'm going to take you far away into the sky, let you fly with the wind before we come down to earth again. The breath I take from you is the emotion that I'm asking of you as a reader. And so in many ways, I am keen in this idea that the way we speak, similarly to Sally, belongs in the world that we live in. I dream of a day where what we are is what we bring to literature, and that is seen in the best of light. But the truth, as all of us know, as readers and educators, is that belonging is a gift that we give each other. Belonging is a gift I can give Ravi in the reading intimate experience of that book. I don't need a political body to say, Kalia, you cannot, or Kalia, you should, And I think this is the biggest thing to learn, as part of a minority without a country. Because if you look at the map of a bigger world, there is no Hmong land anywhere in it. I think we are an incredible experiment, a timeless experiment. You don't need nation states to become one people. There are Hmong in America, Hmong in Australia, Hmong in French Guiana, Hmong in Germany, Hmong in Laos, French in China. When I look at another Hmong person, I see we're like a leaf in the wind, traveling all across the world. We belong because we belong to each other. That is the gift we give. And so, in many ways, Ravi, I think you did a fantastic job. And for anybody that finds your language indelicate, how privileged that they've never lived on the other side of life, how privileged that they've not been privy to the many thick accents that flavor all of the world's languages.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. Yes, and Dominique?
I'm half Sindhi, and that means that part of my heritage is sort of on the other side of the border. And as a result of that, my mom used to tell me that if you don't have a land, it's really hard to be connected to your language. And I sort of have to agree because I don't speak any Sindhi. I'm not at all in touch with that side of me. So I always sort of think of it as um, almost like a stranger in the kitchen that you don't know how to approach. They're in your space, but you don't know what to say to them. And you sort of awkwardly stand around them. And that's just how I think of that language, which is a pity. But I always, try and sort of bring that in, that sort of otherness. And I just think that that is a very important thing to bring in. I also do agree with Sally that there is a problem with elitism. I I feel that a lot as a fantasy fiction writer, actually, because I think that there is a sort of perception that it's like, you throw the ring into Mordor and that's it. But but I think that the genre is a really interesting sort of a petri dish to explore a lot of the issues that we're dealing with today. So the manuscript that I'm working on now does talk about imperialism. It does talk about losing a culture. It does talk about having your culture appropriated. And I was thinking about the British colonialism in India, and that's kind of what inspired it. But yeah, I do think that that is a very good genre to explore these things. But yeah.
Thank you, Dominique. And how about in the Byron Bay bubble?
Byron Bay bubble. Yeah, it's a bubble. Yeah, I kind of feel privileged in the worst sense of the word living here. But when I think a lot about translation and culture, and when we're talking about language here, the literary language, so to speak, the street language, and then I heard it was a great piece of good news the other day that the first school in our state, New South Wales, had opened up to teach Indigenous children with their language, which is like, my God, how many decades has this taken to get to such a basic response to what's needed here in our own country. But it's all about language, isn't it? And it's all about translation too, how critical that is, whether you're just translating someone in your community that you perhaps have difficulty having a conversation with in the kitchen, like you were saying, Damini. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, well put. Well, we've arrived at that tense moment, that tightrope walk of offering profundity and wisdom and hope and insight to our audience. Or you can just talk about whatever it is recently that's really got you inspired. But this is something that Ravi has signed off with on each one of the ISO breaks, and I think it's a really wonderful tradition. Is there anything you want to share as a way of saying goodbye? Actually, not just for the night, but for the year. This is the last ISO break of 2021. Anything that gives you hope or inspiration or something that we might think about as we wait for the next IsoBreak in 2022?
Well, I guess I've got one. I came across it last night while I was just trawling online looking for something. Dorothy Parker, and she says, "As everyone in Hollywood knows, if you can survive the twilight, you can survive the night." And I just think that that's a really beautiful way of describing where we've been and hopefully where we're going next year, into the night.
Great, Sally. Thank you.
And I'd like to offer the wisdom of my grandmother. My grandmother always said that life is too big for any one human being to give your all to all of life. But if we give ourselves to one moment, then we open up the possibility for the next. That in the end, life is nothing more than moments strung on the thread of time. And that is how I live. That is how I will rise in the morning. Because if there's something I didn't do so well today, tomorrow, chances just might be I'll get another chance. And so with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank all of your readers and writers for the incredible work that you shared.
Thank you, Calcalia. We need you on every month.
Yeah.
Dominique?
As we enter the new year, I just want to something that I've been doing a lot that's really helped me over the last year or two is confidently trying new things I'm really bad at. So I just want to say that, the next year, I think we should all do that. Let's just be confidently wrong. And I think we'll create beautiful things that way.
I've got the wrong part down, so I'm just halfway there. Thank you.
Just do it like you meant to do it.
Okay, I'm transformed. Helen?
Probably for me, the thing that comes up most is in this period of change is nature. Just making sure that when I get up in the morning each day, before I do anything else, I go out and I just, get in touch, whether it's the sky or a blade of glass. That's just going on as it has done for millennia. And here we are, going about this weird period of history. But meanwhile, nature is just doing its thing. And I think we just need to connect with that on a daily basis, consciously. Yeah.
Here, absolutely. Difficult to do where I live, but we'll be down in Byron Bay soon, I hope.
Please come.
Dr. Shanker.
Well, it of course was just Diwali recently, the Festival of Lights, which always tends to give me hope. And I think part of what Kali was saying, I think, is that we need to cultivate compassion and forgiveness. I think we're in a very inflexible, judgmental moment where on social media and elsewhere, it's really easy to castigate and to cast aspersion. And it feels like this is a time more deeply than ever, perhaps, that we need to really connect with our shared humanity, which no matter where we are, we all want the same things. We all want love and we want safety. And I want my work as well to work towards that goal. And it's just something that I keep in mind. And as I meet people and connect with people, I mean, it's like there are this generation's freedom riders who are doing the good work that needs to be done. And so I am actually hopeful in spite of everything that seems to be happening. And I think, we're coming through it. We're coming through it.
Yeah. I'll just close by saying that for me, any kind of sustaining inspiration almost always comes from the arts in ways that I don't expect. And often it's from reading. And I'm thinking of the statement, I think it's from LP, is it LP Hartley, the novel called The Go-Between, where I think in the opening paragraph he says, the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. And I am only very recently picking up the memoir by Diane DePrima called Memoir of a Beatnik. from the 1950s and 1960s, and she's writing about New York City and writing about the environs. And talk about life writing. Her experience is soaked into every page, nearly literally. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking this could not be done today in university classrooms. And I feel like there's such a great loss of frankness and willingness to put lived experience onto the page and to take a risk and be vulnerable with it. And I really hope that in 2022, we begin to open up some space for that kind of risk taking, and to remember that we're on the shoulders of these people. Let's not forget it. They did what they did for a reason, and it was liberating when it happened. And it's really sad to see the space constrict. So I hope that people will read Diane DePrima as I am, and maybe take something positive away from it. Anyway, so wonderful to be with you guys tonight. A fantastic reading, a multiplicity of voices, the whole planet represented, and just another, gleaming example of the value of IsoBreak and the value of literature, as Sally was pointing out earlier. So thank you so much, everyone, for checking in from everywhere around the world. This will be posted, I think, probably in the next 45 minutes or an hour to YouTube and to the APWT sites.
Come to Greece if anyone can make it. Try to come. It's going to be a great trip.
New York Writers Workshop in Athens, absolutely, where we're going to make an accommodation for every kind of disreputable behavior that's ever been done from the beginning of time. Okay.
That's a good philosophy. I'm there.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.